welcome to episode 39 of Skeptic Smash Talk. I'm your host, Jason Jones. Now, this is an extra supplemental episode to episode 38, mostly because the last episode was just 55 minutes of me getting pissed off, but also because today we had the results of the first hearing for what is, better known as the court case of the people of the kingdom, represented by Gina Miller, versus the government, represented by the Secretary of State for the exiting of the EU, obviously in relation to Brexit. I'll get to that post-haste, but I also have some updates on the US elections and the Dakota pipeline and some feedback and some bits and pieces that we didn't get to last week. So, that said, let's get on with it. Okay, so only yesterday, Boris Johnson, the fat Malfoy and Brexit's cheerleader-in-chief, said that the UK's exit from the European Union will be a Titanic success. And that was pretty much the first correct thing he's actually said on the matter. And apparently he meant to say it would be colossal, but have a listen to what he had said.
Hugely enthusiastic about that vision. And I think it's going to work. And in the words of our great Prime Minister, I'm delighted to say he is here to hear these
Now,
words.
did you catch that? Sorry, I had to stop that there. Listen, Malfoy, I'm not too sure if you know this or not, but Mrs. May is a she, not a he. Anyway, let's get on to what he actually said.
I believe they understand that Brexit means Brexit, and we are going to make a Titanic success of it. So thank you, and I thank you very, very much. To
the Titanic sank.
Thank you very much, and to those of you, the Chancellor, the former Chancellor has just. Does he not know? Does he not know that the Titanic exhibition in Northern Ireland is the single most popular tourist attraction in the province? Of course it is, and we are going to make a colossal success of Brexit. And I thank the Spectator very much for the honour they have done me. And George, give me the honour. Thank you very much.
Okay, a few things there. The biggest catastrophe of British making, not including the storming of Gallipoli, was the Titanic, which sank when it crashed into an iceberg in 1912, as you may remember. So is he referring to that, or is he referring to Brexit being a tourist attraction? It beggars belief. These are the fuckbrains that are running this kingdom right now. Anyway, this was all said yesterday when Fat Malfoy was presenting an award to George Osborne at the Spectator Parliamentarian of the Year Awards. The awards that are so prestigious that even numbnuts Nigel got some silverware. Perhaps there were too many icebergs in his Pims, or perhaps Boris's bucket of fucks is now completely empty. But for now, that's not important. I'm sure you've all heard by now that the courts have told the government that they are the government and not our overlords and rulers. In fact, the court has told the nation the answer to the question that nobody was actually asking, but they all assumed they knew the answer to. And this is all about sovereignty. So amongst the hate and the bigotry and the post-truth political rhetoric, the word that the right-leaning press used quite often was sovereignty, and that we needed to take sovereignty back from the European Parliament. Well, as the court ruled, we had it all along, and it's called the Parliament. Not the Prime Minister, not the government, not the Queen, it's Parliament. Anyway, today, the Lord Chief Justice declared that the government does not have power under the Crown's prerogative to give notice pursuant to Article 50 for the UK to withdraw from the European Union. Now, the government has said that it will contest the ruling in the Supreme Court, with the case set to be heard in December this year, although On what grounds they are appealing is not clear, but perhaps my mum and aunt May is invoking the boo-hoo I can't be a dictator rule. But there are also some other comments from our political betters. So Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron, who is a supporter of Remain for the EU, said that ultimately the British people voted for a departure but not for a destination, which is why what really matters is allowing them to vote again on the final deal, giving them, us, the chance to say no to an irresponsible hard Brexit that would risk our economy and our jobs. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, said that this ruling underlines the need for the government to bring its negotiating terms to Parliament without delay. Labour respects the decision of the British people to leave the European Union, but there must be transparency and accountability to Parliament on the terms of the Brexit. He finished with, Labour will be pressing the case for a Brexit that works for Britain, putting jobs, living standards and the economy first. And obviously Numbnuts Nigel is popping his hate-filled head up out of the ground again like an ADD meerkat, looking for some attention. I don't think anybody's listening to him. But what about the leader of the Brexit pack? What does Boris have to say? Well, he released this at a press conference this afternoon. But not to be discouraged by any actual laws or the ruling of the courts. The PM's spokesperson told journalists today that our plans remain to invoke Article 50 by the end of March. We believe the legal timetable should allow for that. The government has declined to give a statement to the House of Commons on the ruling, instead saying it will update MPs next week. So that shows pretty much how much respect the government has right now for the Parliament. But anyway, in brief, the Lord Chief Justice said the government's arguments had been contrary to fundamental constitutional principles of the sovereignty of Parliament. The ruling said the court does not accept the argument put forward by the government. There is nothing in the text of the 1972 Act, and that was the act to join the EU, to support it. I'll post the full decision papers and all the supplements to skepticsmashtalk.com if you want to have a read. It'll be in the show notes for this episode 39. But anyway, I think we all know that this is not going to be the end. Numbnuts Nigel has been closely studying the habits and rituals of all the Trumpophiles in America, and he'll be looking for new and exciting ways now to stir up just a little bit more hate and fear, because this is all about sovereignty and justice and £350 million per week to the NHS and more jobs and free trade and prosperity for the country. It's not about hate or fear or bigotry. Right, Nigel? But hopefully it will send a message and give the kingdom some hope. And Thor willing, stop the wildlings from talking about their independence. But if you really want to be angry about something, be angry that the people that are supposed to be governing us don't have a fucking clue on what sovereignty actually means. I talked about the British Constitution, or lack thereof, a few weeks back. But the best thing that we have to explain all the bits and pieces that make up our not a constitution, well, the best thing we have instead are the writings of Albert Dicey, in particular his introduction to the study of the law of constitution, especially its principles as they form a major part of the uncodified British Constitution. In it, he says on sovereignty of Parliament, the sovereignty of Parliament is, from a legal point of view, the dominant characteristic of our political institutions. And my readers will remember that Parliament consists of the King, or the Queen now, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons acting together. The principle, therefore, of parliamentary sovereignty means that neither more nor less than this, namely that the Parliament has the right to make or unmake any law whatever, and further, that no person or body is recognised by the law of England as having a right to override or set aside the legislation of the Parliament. A lot of words, what does that mean? Well, remember a few weeks back I talked about the will of the people? Remember I talked about legalising pot, or how President Erdogan is acting on behalf of the will of the people. Even here, it turns out that 60% of the British people would also like to bring back the death penalty. That's the will of the people. So why don't we do that? Well, what Albert Dicey is saying here is that no one, no person, or no one part of the Parliament has the right to overrule the Parliament. Not the Queen, not the government, not the House. You have heard me say this before. The government, and particularly the Prime Minister, cannot overturn an act of Parliament. Only Parliament can. So if you don't believe me when I say it, you must believe it when one of the most senior judges, the Chief Justice, has declared that this is so. Once again, if you want to be angry about something, be angry that the people that are supposed to be governing us don't have a fucking clue on what sovereignty actually means, and neither do the people that demanded it on the 23rd of June. So I've spent most of the year focusing on the fat orange Joffrey when it comes to the elections. And as I had to remind Twitter this weekend, because I'm not a supporter of Trump, this does not mean that I am a supporter of Hillary. The thing is with her, well, apart from the email protocols anyway, to which more anon, she really has kept the scandals down. I guess she did this by keeping appearances short and spaced. There was a time when in more than 260 days she had just one press conference, and even that was staged with pre-approved questions and pre-approved reporters. But before I move on or get too far, I do feel obliged to add this in. So Dum Dum is now all over the Twitter laughing and pointing at Hillary, and his minions are asking should she be allowed to continue in the race if she has possible charges pending. Well, I'm sure by now you are all aware of the 11 women that have come forward accusing Donald Trump of sexual assault. Remember also that there is a pending court case with an actual trial date where Trump is accused of raping a 13-year-old girl. That case is in December this year. As well as his Trump University scan, as well as investigations into his foundations. And yes, I hear myself, it's not a competition. They are both equally contemptible humans. But Dum Dum needs to keep his halo polish put away for now. But to the newly opened FBI case and the emails that FBI Director James Comey has serendipitously found and advised the Senate of in what has been underplayed as an unprecedented and possibly indictable move. And before you ask, yes, that was done contra to government legal advice. And even he admits in his letter, again, an unprecedented move that he sent to his staff after he announced that they were looking into further emails that were discovered in another case, the infamous Wiener pic of Wiener's wiener that he may or may not have sent to a 15-year-old girl. Well, it turns out that Wiener is, or was, married to one of Clinton's closest aides, and a dick pic may be the cause of the end of the world as we know it. And don't get me wrong, I said way back when that there must be some sort of sanction for her actions when it comes to her emails. And I don't care if at the time the information was not classified. That's besides the point. Important in the long run, yes, but not the point. At no time has anyone considered that the reason she did this was to deceive the people of America. She knew, as did the people that did this before her, that setting up a private email server would block the public's access to any emails under any freedom of information laws. Actually, when you think about it, if any classified emails were sent via the government system, due to that security classification alone, the public wouldn't have had the rights under any FOIA anyway. So chasing after her for that was a red herring. why did they not bother exposing the deception that she used to betray the nation? So it's easy enough to play conspiracy theorist, but it's even easier to think about tactics and game theory. Think of it like this. The GOP must have known that the DNC was stabbing Bernie Sanders in the back. And when you take out the superdelegates and the areas where the DNC suppressed voters, Sanders should have been the clear winner, the very clear winner. And I'm not saying that as a Bernie fan, which I am. I'm saying that as a witness to everything that we saw. More so, as much as Trump has whipped up the populist right, Bernie did the same thing on the left. We've seen the emails. He would have nailed it. But the DNC did everything they could to push him out. So that's the GOP's first move. Do nothing, sit back and let the DNC knock their own favourite out. And then they wait until the right moment. And that happened to be 11 days before the actual election day. And they have their FBI director drop a massive bombshell. And don't be fooled that there's anything incriminating in them. There may be not. But I'd like to think that the 12 special investigators that worked on the original case would have had some pretty handy boffins working on them. And all that aside, they are looking at emails that Clinton had sent to her top aide. So even let's just say that they didn't see these emails originally. If the FBI were clear that everything else that she had sent to her was not a chargeable offence, then why would these others be different? And when I say others, right now, and I have nothing else to back this up apart from a comment from Cenk Uygur, there are no less, which is really confusing too. They're saying there's no less than 3 emails. Other sources are saying there are up to 650,000 emails, which is extraordinary. If Hillary had sent her aide 100 emails a day, every day, it would take 17 years to accumulate 650,000 emails. Let's just say they work their asses off. They work a 16-hour day to even send 100 emails a day. That's 6 emails every hour that Hillary's sending her aide. Every 10 minutes to get to 650,000, she would have to send an email every 10 minutes, working a 16-hour day, which I've no doubt that they do, for 17 years. It's extraordinary. But wait, that's nothing. And this is probably more important than anything else. At the time when Comey sent his letter to Congress, he had not been granted a warrant or knew any of the contents of the emails. Okay, chances are, well, maybe very slim, somebody would have read them. It's the FBI. Let's not just pretend that couldn't have happened. But chances are they contain tips for growing roses in the White House soil. As it stands, or as it stood, when Comey sent his letter to Congress, nobody knew what was contained in those emails. And if they didn't know what was contained in them, and they didn't have a warrant, they wouldn't know who they were from or who they were to. But to wind this part of the story up, well, it looks like Director Comey has fallen foul of federal laws himself by doing this. It turns out that there are laws in place to prevent officials from influencing an election. And being that his legal advice at the time was not to take this action, he really has no way out of this. But perhaps that was part of the conspiracy all along. Comey is a Republican, and between government appointments, he spoke out quite loudly about the government, in particular the Department of Justice. And many were shocked when he was appointed in 2013 by Obama. But I think he must have known his days were numbered in a Clinton presidency. He still has 7 years left on his contract, but I think she would have found a way to, let's just say, retire early. So now, what has he got to lose? Basically, the square root of fuck all. Obviously, he's not going to do any time for this. It's not like he had, a minuscule amount of pot on him, or he was selling single cigarettes or walking down the street whilst being black. No. He'll fall on the sword. He'll take a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure agreement and end up working for a defense contractor back in Washington. But let's not forget Clinton. In any other race, Hillary wouldn't have had a chance. As far as popularity is concerned, yeah, okay, this isn't a popularity contest, but being that the populist movement is gaining a shitload of momentum all around the world, it may as well be. Not my point, but look at it like this. Clinton finished the primary process as one of the least popular politicians in history. And although Trump's unlikability rating was 10 points higher, at this point, he wasn't a politician. And that speaks volume in and of itself. You have essentially a celebrity and a reality TV star, which in any other scenario would have had the crowd at his feet from coast to coast for no other reason than that he's rich and he's on the TV. Because they are the most important people on the planet, according to the masses, the rich people that are on the TV. But not dum-dum, not at the end of all this. All that he has done and all his actions have done is make Clinton look good. And that's a near-on impossibility in itself. One of the worst people in politics, one of the least liked people in politics, is standing out like an angel. And I know it seems like a distant memory now, but remember the hatchet job she did on Bernie Sanders and the millions she was paid by the bankers and the millions she received by a foundation that somehow coincided with the donator getting some political preferences. Remember the super predator content, the BLM protester that she callously dismissed. But we forget these things, especially when the next thing pops up. And when the fat orange Joffrey says the next tirade of bigotry or threats to the media or his opponents. And let me sort of divert myself for a second. Do you want to know who you should be blaming for the rise and hopeful fall of Trump? I've just told you. It's the media itself. The organisation that Trump will probably try and shut down if he was to win. And it's for two reasons, really. The first is that they need to sell adverts and they need clicks and they need likes and they need lols. But there's the other reason, and it's the same reason the media are holding off on Clinton. They need access. Access is key. Well, access to the winner is key. The loser will be begging for media attention. So much so, I reckon I could even get an interview with the loser on this show. So while they are hedging their bets on Hillary and keeping nice with her, they are also holding back just a little on Dum Dum. Or else, why are we not hearing more about all his business failures, all his failed deals? Why are we not hearing about how he's misusing his campaign funds? We're hearing just enough. For everything else, you either have to go digging amongst the conspiracy theory bullshit or find a decent independent source like the Young Turks. And yes, they have their biases too, but at least they openly admit it. Anyway, Trump knows that even his money can't stop the media blacking him out at any time if they want to, especially when he loses. So that's why he has his so-called Trump TV, which is nothing more than a Facebook live feed. But can you imagine what he could do with the media if he was to win? Again, I'll give you Turkey and Russia and China and North Korea as examples. Anyway, my point here is that you literally have a giant douchebag making a turd sandwich look appetizing. Maybe even worse than that. As I'm recording this, I don't know what the full extent of the FBI or the new FBI claim is. I suspect it's party politics at work, and I'll get to that in a second. But as much as we have the giant douchebag making the turd sandwich look like a tasty meal, there is a chance that either or both candidates for president could be charged or impeached for criminal behaviour. It's more likely that this will be Trump than Clinton, but right now we don't know what's in the new email. So let's talk about that and what they may actually mean. So I said just now that this feels like party politics at work, and I didn't mean that in a way that it will affect the results of the presidential election. I really don't think at this stage of the game there are any swing voters left. Well, not enough to make a difference. It's possible that it may result in more write-in votes or spoil votes, but again, I'm not too sure how much of a difference that this will make, especially given that due to the early voting process, as I'm recording this right now, about 30 or 40% of ballots have been cast anyway. But like I say, because of the temperament of the nation and the political passion that all of this controversy is fired up, it seems to be that supporters are holding fast to their candidate. And because they are essentially polar opposites, there's nothing in the middle to entice anyone from either camp into the other. But what about the down ticket votes, the seats in the House? This is massively important to both sides. You could even say more important than the main event. Look at it now. Obama has been a lame duck for some time now. And towards the end of his tenure, you do expect that. But I would say he's been a lame duck for quite a few years. What if Clinton takes the Oval Office? That's nice. But if the GOP have the majority in the houses, well, all they're going to do for the next 4 years is block her. And if you don't believe me, John McCain, who I once admired, has said exactly this. He will block her when it comes to Supreme Court nominations. So did Mike Lee. And the same is true for numbnuts. If he wins and the Democrats take the House, okay, well, that may in fact save the world from Armageddon. Well, until he has them shackled, that is. But that scenario aside, the fat orange Joffrey won't get anything done if the Democrats have the majorities. But there's something else that really worries me, and this is the possibility of general voter apathy. And that's what happened in the UK, and that's what we were warned about. What do I mean by that? Well, the Brexit decision was won because more Leave voters turned out than Remain voters. So many people didn't think that their one vote would matter, so they stayed in, or they were worried about the presumed violence or the voter fraud. And this is one of my favourites. The staff, this was a rumour, the staff in the polling stations were going to erase and change their vote. So everybody was told, via the rumour mills, to make sure you bring a pen or a permanent marker. But mostly, they didn't come out and vote. Yeah, it was one of the highest turnouts for a very, very long time. But when polled later, the ones that didn't vote, by a very vast majority, were always in the Remain camp.
Hi, this is the voiceover robot. If you want to have each new podcast delivered as soon as it's released, go to skepticsmashtalk.com and subscribe.
So the other day I watched a documentary on hate preachers, and, well, it wouldn't be a documentary on hate preachers if one of the planet's most vile humans, well, on this planet or any other, was not featured. And of course I'm talking about the future Ted Haggard, Pastor Stephen Anderson. You remember him? No? Have a listen to this.
The preaching of God's word is taking place. First of all, it's not for a woman to be doing the preaching. And second of all, it's not for women to be speaking. Even the Bible's really clear on this. Even if they were to have a question, they're not to ask that question in the church, number one. And number two, even if they want to ask that question to their husband, they should wait until they get home. If we're going to be true to Scripture, then basically we would say, okay, when it's time for learning, that's a time for women to keep silent.
Anyway, his church, the Faithful Word Baptist Church, believes that the King James Bible is the inspired Word of God and is without error. Well, I also have a book that is the inspired word of a genius of the highest order, and it may contain errors, but let me read from it. From Carl Sagan's The Pale Blue Dot. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilizations, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all of those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel, the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbour life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we must make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Carl Sagan, Pale Blue Dot, 1994. Now, I was lucky enough to get tickets. Actually, Andy got them for me last year for Christmas to see Professor Brian Cox live. And he read out these very same words, and the crowd were rightly humbled. And I love these words, especially as a veteran. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. How insane is that? Think about the overall result of World War II. Over 72 million people dead, and 70 years later, all that remains, all that was changed, the only thing we've got left are some lines on a map, and not even the lines that either side imagined in the beginning. And not that there's any agreement as to when the war actually started. Ask most people and they'll say it was 1939 when the guy with the tiny little mustache invaded Poland, or 2 days later when the UK and France declared war on Germany. And that there's also a point worth remembering. Britain and France declared war on Germany, not the other way around. Anyway, some say that the war started in the early 1930s when the Japanese invaded China. Others, including the aforementioned Lance Corporal with the slug on his lip, say that for the real Germans, the November criminals, as they called them, had already abandoned their nation, and as such, the Great War had never ended. But Lance Corporal Sluglip was so shit, he couldn't even get into art school, so history may not have been his strongest academic attribution. And while we're on the fun fact ride, being that the treaty with Japan was not signed until 1951, and Germany was not unified until 1990, I think we can dispense with the formality of dates and concede that the real toll of that war is unimaginable. Also, that for a minuscule moment in time, someone could claim mastery and sovereignty of a small fraction of a pale blue dot. A pixel in a photograph that's hurtling through space from the assumed to the unknown and for a yet to be determined reason. And science is brilliant. Pastor Fuckface's book tells us that some guy made the earth about 6,000 years ago. In fact, according to some people and the Bible, it was created on October 23, 4004 BCE. And nothing will change their minds. Their book, their words on paper are unequivocal and infallible, without error. So when we learn new things, they come up with excuses or ignore them. But science doesn't. Science says, that's fucking cool. I didn't expect that. Just in the last 7 days alone, we've learnt that the count of galaxies in our universe is 20 times more than we thought the week before last. We went from a few 100 billion to 200 trillion. Let me just put that into a scale. Let's take seconds. There are 1 million seconds in 11 days. But 1 billion seconds, that's 31.7 years. Look at the difference between 1 million seconds and 1 billion seconds. 11 days to a third of a lifetime. 31.7 years. 31.7 years ago, Wham were belting out rock classics such as Careless Whisper and suggesting that we should wake them up before we go. But when we go from 1 billion to 1 trillion, we go from 31.7 years to 31,710 years. So on our scale, we went from billions of galaxies to trillions. We went from wake me up before you go to the oldest known figurative art of the human figure as opposed to zoomorphic figures. The very first dog skulls, the very first humans have reached Australia. The Neanderthals, a whole other species of Homo, had just been eradicated. And in the last few weeks or so, we learned around about this time, there may have been a third type of species Homo mincing around the Pacific. But most importantly, the Paleolithic people were taking the piss out of future humans by pretending that they hated carbs and grains and really loved eating lean meat and fruit. And cheese, well, cheese was reserved for pizza night. But how do you pass this information if you truly believe the words in your book? The words written on thinly sliced trees, the method only invented 2,100 years ago. The words that say God made man in his own image, but says nothing of the Neanderthals or the yet to be identified new species. 3 species of genus Homo, including ourselves, wandered around the pale blue dot 30,000 years ago, probably at the same time. But your book that was written by men and changed by men to suit the narrative of the time, your book that you wave with hate towards other humans to other genus Homo, the unchanging word of God that had to be changed in the 17th century to suit the politics of the day. What about the other species of Homo? Not to mention hominids that we know and the ones that are yet to be discovered. The book of the inspired word of God that is the true word and without error, except for 200 trillion other galaxies, not to mention the other planets dancing around our sun and the moons of these planets that someday we will find life on. Life never seen on Earth. My books, all of my books change all the time. And we love hearing this. We love hearing that there is something new. I love that another human has found a different way to describe what is happening on this insignificant rock or out there in the universe that may in fact not be expanding in the way that we thought it was just a few weeks ago. And how many scientists are angry about this? How many scientists that were looking for dark matter that no longer needs to exist, if this is true, are calling for blood, calling for the death of the people that don't agree with them? None. Not a single one. They are celebrating the discovery. And still, somehow, this was missed out of your book. The book you use to spread hate and to hurt people, to tell others to make women and children less, to hurt or to harm or to kill anyone that does not share your doctrine of hate. If God was sitting in his recliner watching the pale blue dot, taking pride in his work, what do you think he would say to you? You, Pastor Stephen Anderson, what do you think he would tell you? How do you think he would react to the way that you treat his children, your wife, women in your community, men who love another man, women who love other humans, men and women that according to your own thinly sliced tree were created in God's image? What would your God say to you, Pastor Stephen Anderson? Don't answer, it's rhetorical. And even if there was a God and he come to see you, to tell you, you wouldn't listen anyway. You don't believe in God. You don't believe in love. You don't believe in anything. All you want to do is spread your vile, poisonous hate as far and as wide as you can. And that is why, for the month of November, Pastor Stephen Anderson, you are the skepticsmashtalk.com Thunder Cunt of the Month.
You've been thunderstruck! Thunderstruck! Yeah, thunderstruck!
So I'm sure most American listeners have heard about the protests at the Dakota pipeline by now, especially where it relates to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and their attempted injunction. Well, you're probably only hearing about it because some word rememberers went along and got arrested. But I think everybody has heard of the siege earlier on this year where Elmer Fudd and his gang, including Eamon Bundy and others, took over by force and with weapons a federal building. You may remember the interviews where the members of this cousin fucking banjo jamboree made threats to kill anyone that tried to remove them. They were going to stay until they died. Have a listen to these two clowns. And sorry about the audio, this is just a small sample of what was going on.
American people better wake up, get here, and fight for your country right now. It is on. What you gonna do when the militia comes after you, FBI? All you military that's been fighting for your country overseas, you can fight for your country right here in America. Get here, get some. It's history in the making. There are no laws in this United States now. This is a free-for-all Armageddon. Any Leo or military or law enforcement or feds that stand up and fuck their oath, don't abide by their oath, are the enemy. They stop you from getting here, kill them.
Right, so, well, if you didn't know, these clowns had their day in court and they've all been acquitted of the charges relating to this siege. Charges such as conspiracy to impede federal officers, threats of force, and legal possession of firearms on a federal facility. They were acquitted by a jury of their peers. And I think that's the very first time in the history of the USA that you can actually say a jury of their peers has actually been true. So let's look at the two cases. One group, heavily armed with assault weapons and body armor on federal land, made threats to shoot and kill any police or military. And what did the law enforcement do? They held back and arrested them as they were leaving the facility. They were all eventually acquitted. At the pipeline, you have Native Americans on private land, on their own land, with no weapons. but the company building this pipeline has brought in private security firms with dogs and pepper spray. On September 3, 6 protesters were attacked by dogs and 30 were pepper sprayed before the security company got in their vehicles and left the area. On October 27, 141 protesters were arrested by police in riot gear who approached the demonstrators with military vehicles emitting high-pitched sound cannons, firing rubber bullets and pepper spray. Some arrested protesters claimed that they had numbers written on their arms and were housed in dog kennels. There was a report that one of the protesters' horses was also shot with a rubber bullet, resulting in the need to euthanize a horse that was shot in the leg. In response, Amnesty International USA have sent observers to the site to monitor the protests for human rights abuses. And there's been photos appearing on Twitter and Facebook of mine-clearing armored vehicles and snipers because a tribe of Native Americans are worried that an oil pipeline will cause a spill and poison the only water supply in the area. But not that they have anything to worry about, because according to a report done by the Associated Press, North Dakota had nearly 300 pipeline spills in less than 2 years, all of which went unreported to the public. According to the report, from January 2012 to September 2013, those pipeline spills were only a part of approximately 750 oil field incidents involving over 4,000 barrels of oil that were spilt without the public's knowledge. Or in context, that's nearly 120,000 litres of spilled oil. Okay, so what have we got? What's happening in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Well, on one side, you have a group of white ranchers who for a long time, longer than what's in this story, have opposed the government and taken it upon themselves to graze their animals wherever they like and not pay the fees for doing so. And at the same time, they are opposing the government they are taking benefit and grants from. Go figure. And then, on the other side, you have the Native American tribes on private land peacefully protesting what could turn out to be an irreparable environmental damage. So an oil company can move its oil around the country by a system that's proven to do exactly what the protesters are protesting about. In the one instance, there are a shit ton of weapons on both sides, to be fair. And on the other instance, there's also a shit ton of weapons and snipers and attack dogs and pepper spray and armoured vehicles, all trained on a group of protesters. And as of yet, there is not a single piece of evidence that any of the Standing Rock group have anything on them more than mobile phones. But a whole heap of them have been arrested, and you know the jury in this case won't be a jury of their peers. There is a photo of one of the tribe's elders being attacked by at least 6 police officers. They've accused her of shooting at them with a revolver. It turns out she had a prayer stick in her hand. And as much as they hold the power of the gods in the same way as many Christians do, I don't think the Native Americans have a god that can make bullets come out of a prayer stick. And that aside, can you imagine if anyone there even pulled out something that looked like it might be a weapon? Come on, think about it. They would have rained bullets down on them. All of this happened, of course, on the day where they sent in 300 law enforcement officers to arrest the 141 protesters so that the privately owned company could get on with making their money. I'm going to stop ranting soon, but how did state police become the enforcers of privately owned companies? There was a tweet last night of a different police force with photos of them providing security for Lady Gaga. And I get it. She's on the telly and she sings and has millions of followers on the internet. Of course she needs an entire army to protect her from the smelly humans that adore her and give her all their money. But couldn't she use some of that money that the people who've come to see her have given her to pay for her own private security? No, she must use the state police force. Maybe she could employ some unemployed people. Maybe she could give a little back. No? Well, she can join in the fuck off line also. Back to Dakota. And now it turns out they're planting protesters, actual false flag operations. How fucking pathetic. They sent in a confirmed employee of the DAPL to go in and observe the protesters internally and then to instigate violence from within. And all this is being confirmed. I had a whole heap more to say, but then we learned today about the 141 that were arrested, locked up in dog kennels and had an identity number written on their arms. It's 2016 and some fuckbrain thought it would be a good idea to lock up humans in a dog kennel and write a number on their arms. And now I see today a group of protesters were round up in the water and were pepper sprayed and shot with rubber bullets, all surrounded by police. There's photos on Facebook showing snipers on high ground. Fucking snipers at a peaceful protest on private land where the protesters have nothing more than mobile phones and prayer sticks. And right now, the thing that the protesters are trying to fight is the fact that the company building the pipeline have built it significantly closer than they were supposed to the water source, to the point where the government have had to intervene and told them they must stop and sort their shit out. But the company have decided to ignore what they're calling government advice. Break it down. The protesters, the Native Americans, are on the land that they were forced onto as a reservation back in the day when the government thought that was a cool idea to do. Now they're upset that the pipeline is going through it with a massive potential to destroy the river and the water table as well. And I just found out today the pipeline is cutting through the tribal burial sites. The government have told the company to have a break and sort out some shit. But the militarized police that are violently attacking the landowners, something pretty fucked up right there just by itself. But surely shouldn't the police be keeping the peace? And if the company doing the pipeline are in breach of the government's regulations and the government have told them not to dig, surely the police are pointing their snipers in the wrong direction. Tell me something, America. Who do your police work for? Do they work for the people or for the corporations? Don't answer, it's rhetorical. Okay, just about done, but very quickly, a few weeks back, I talked about QED and some of the personal difficulties that I was having. Well, some good news on that. Andy Wilson just happened to be at the Brian Cox lecture last week, and we bumped into each other, and he let me know that it was something that they want to take care of. But I also had an email from Mike Hall. And sorry, these are two of the 6 or 7 of the organisers that make the QED magic happen. Mike, you'll remember from Skeptics with a K podcast. He's a suit-wearing Doctor Who aficionado. And Andy Wilson hosts the Incredulous podcast. You may not have heard of that one. I think he hosts it from Inside Brigadoon. That aside, both are really good podcasts, and you should be listening to them, not me. Anyway, Mike contacted me also and asked that we get together to see what can be done to make it a better experience for next time. And actually, I think that was meant to happen tonight at the Liverpool Skeptics in the pub, but given the Brexit court decision today and the attitude of the local bigots and hate groups, I think Liverpool is not the best place for me tonight. So I'm here yelling at my microphone, eating a steak and mushroom pie. Okay, well, that's about enough out of me. Next week's show, we'll be talking to Matthew James, and we're talking about his book, Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World. And as you can imagine, we go off on some fairly wild tangents, and occasionally we may even spend more than about 3 minutes on a single topic. And I still need to condense over 2 hours of the interview into about an hour. Now, there'll be a few extra shows also next week. Obviously, on the 8th, there's the US elections, and not just for the POTUS, but the House elections, and there's some bills as well. So hopefully I'll get enough information on time and I'll get an extra show out on that. I've also got a fairly massive backlog of listener feedback and some other stories that keep getting pushed aside. So being that all the TV shows take a hiatus from about now, and apart from the likes of Big Bang Theory having a few weeks off and then for no reason comes back for a single episode, then they fuck off again till January. To fill in those gaps, you can listen to me if you're that desperate. And if I can tear her away from work, Andy may even join me. As always, feedback, statements of love and hate mail are always welcome. You can send them to skepticsmashtalk@gmail.com or go to skepticsmashtalk.com where you can find all the contact details. And you can even now sign up for the monthly newsletter, which will contain all the information for the previous month, all the links, all the extra bits, and a few other bits and pieces that are yet to be announced. So go to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and like and lols and heart or whatever positive emoticon is available. And until next time, I've been Jason Jones, and this has been Skeptic Smash Talk.